Hey everyone, so my setup's kind of weird right now, so hopefully this records fine. For my project, I tried to piece together various locations and picture the locations in the Underground Railroad in Indiana while examining their cultural significance in the communities that they occupy. My main focus, though, was on compiling as many of these locations as possible rather than narratives, so that's going to be mainly what I'm presenting today. Um, I feel like this relates back nicely to the document that we were given in class, since it brings back a portion of the visual aspects that were otherwise lost when it was translated to text. Of course, with the limitations of what I'm working with in both time and material, less well known or less permanent stops may not have been found, and it was more the concrete and well established stops that were examined. I really only got completely done with Elkhart County, as far as you can get complete with something like this. Um, there were a couple reasons why I started with Elkhart County. First and foremost was because this is where I'm from, so it was of special interest to me. And the other was that this is one of the counties that borders Michigan, which was considered a safer area for fugitive slaves to run to, presumably because it's closer to Canada and it's the northernmost state. So if they are pursued further, they could escape there and find further refuge. Um, I found that generally there's not much in the way of concrete documentation as far as the Underground Railroad goes. There was often somewhat incomplete documentation on a few websites that I found, but any more holistic presentations were really only found in exhibits. Um, I emailed a couple of exhibits, but they haven't really gotten back to me yet. So hopefully, if I continue this project further, I'll be able to get more information from them. What was sort of a windfall for me was finding this 1874 map of Elkhart County with various known stops on the Underground Railroad circled. It was originally under the ownership of the Elkhart County Historical Museum, but I was able to track down a book that had the map as well. Uh, Trying to get these actual physical locations of the sites that I'm going to present took up the majority of my time on this project, since I really only found this map towards the end, and I didn't have as much time to progress further after I got the whole uh, thing worked out. When I continue this project, I'll likely present a series of pictures of sites. Due to the scope, it's not really feasible to run a tour of all of Indiana, but that's what fit best for what I have so far, since a lot of what I have is somewhat inaccurate due to the time that's passed since these maps were made and the information was presented. I'll start from the southernmost part of the county and move towards the northernmost part of the county. The first stop that you can see here is the residence of Abner Blue. I don't really have any real slave narratives for him, so I'll just tell you a bit about his life. He was born in 1819 in Ohio. His father, James, who was a justice, an associate judge, and a representative for the county, died the same year that Abner was born. I'm assuming that's where part of his political leanings go, that background of his. He was the youngest of 9 children, and he moved to Elkhart County when he was 17. He was a member of a local church that was greatly opposed to slavery, and he joined a group of more serious dissidents to take more drastic action against slavery. What else he did besides assisting runaway slaves, I was unable to find, but one of the sites that I referenced um, suggested that he did other things to combat the slave trade. He had 7 children born from 2 wives, and uh, the source that I referenced um, assumed that his children were unaware of the efforts due to how poorly children make as keepers of secrets. And they suggested that his wives may or may not have known about his efforts in combating the slave trade. The only other thing I got was that he died in 1984 in Goshen, Indiana. So that's Abner Blue right here. The next three I kind of lumped together. They're Jesse Adams, W.J. Matchett, and William Martin, which all kind of occupy the same narrow stretch of the road down here. Let me drag this over. I'm fairly certain about this one that let me get a good view of it. That this is the kind of current day residence of sorry, of Jesse Adams. But the other two are where I kind of had trouble with. So if you look at the map, it's all kind of in the same area, but compared to the Google map here, is kind of weirdly scaled, and the dots take up like a really large portion of the map compared to how much space the actual sites occupy. So as I moved down, I was thinking originally that, okay, this is part of Jesse Adams' farm, possibly, or maybe it's part of W.J. Matchett's farm, and then his house will be off to the right. So I go down. This particular lot ends here. So when I was originally looking for the sites, I thought that perhaps this is where William Martin had his farm. You can see a couple structures down the road here. But then, as I was going down, I saw yet another farm right here. If I can get towards it, back there. So I wasn't sure if this perhaps could be William Martin's, and the other one was W.J. Matchett. And then there's yet another farm here. So it was really kind of hard to discern. This is the point in the project where I decided that perhaps a virtual tour was the best format for presenting the information. Then the next stop is the residence of H.G. Davis, right here. He joined the James G. Mitchell farm at some point in time, and he operated a sawmill in the area. The nearby river you can kind of see on the map running through here. It was mentioned that they both had a mutual acquaintance of a certain Dr. E.W.H. Ellis. If you see that notification, I don't really know how to turn it off, just ignore it. Who occasionally asked them to harbor slaves. So I'm assuming that this is the person that got them into contact with the Underground Railroad, or at least assisted them in the running of their stations. So I'll take you to the James G. Mitchell farm as soon as I orient myself here. There we go. This was another kind of vague location. I wasn't sure exactly if it was over in this corner or if it was back here, but I'm led to believe that this is the location after looking at the map a little more. It just seemed to fit location of the dot, but I haven't really found one way or the other exactly where it was. Like most of the people that I'm examining in this, they were fairly prominent individuals. Mitchell and Davis were, that is. They were mentioned as being a relatively important stop in the Underground Railroad. I'm not necessarily certain why that was. Perhaps it's just, a more well-trafficked area. Perhaps they were more active in taking slaves towards Michigan. Then back onto the main path, we have Charles L. Murray, which should be right about here. After kind of looking at the map, you can kind of see crops back there behind the trees. I'm led to believe that this roughly was where he was at. Interestingly enough, a source run by the Indiana government said that this was the last stop on the Underground Railroad in Indiana, but there were at least 3 other stops present on the map, and I was able to kind of confirm those stops with other documents that they did exist, in fact. There are a couple reasons why I believe this misidentification could have occurred. Either they confused the names, or it was just due to the general elusiveness of the Underground Railroad, or perhaps, historians examined various stops and were satisfied with what they had found and said, this is it, that they had paid their homage to the slave trade resistance, and they had declared that nothing of further value was present. I don't know what it is. Perhaps it was a mix of those, but that's what I've got. To prevent falling into the same trap, though, I'd like to emphasize that these are only the stops that I was able to find, and they by no means represent the whole of Elkhart County and the stops that were present. The next stop is the residence of Owen Coffin. This was another one that people said was the last stop in Indiana. Perhaps what they meant is that it was the last significant stop. Perhaps the other 2 stops that I've identified were less regular or less established. So let's see if I can find that real quick. I believe it was around here. One second. It's a little farther up. Ah, here we go. We're coming up on it. Yeah, so this general area was where Owen Coffin was located. On the right here. It's kind of hard to find because this whole general area has been more urbanized, so the farms aren't really present anymore. Oh, you get the idea. Yeah, so the sources that I found said that this was the last stop on the Underground Railroad, but you can see that there are 2 others, Judson and Maudlin, that were present. Perhaps it was just one of the larger stops. The next one I'll look at is Judson, Samuel Judson. Let me there real quick. Oh, wrong street, sorry. this here. There we go. Somewhere in this general area. Here we go. I was assuming that it's kind of on the inside of this rectangle you see here. Let me get to the point that I wanted to look at. Okay. There was actually a fairly significant local court case involving Judson in 1847, where 3 armed slave catchers from Kentucky tried to capture Thomas Harris, a fugitive slave that was being harbored in Samuel Judson's house. The men were confronted by Judson after they attempted to take Harris at gunpoint, and they presented him with a warrant for the arrest of Harris. He took them to court, and the warrant was ruled as being insufficient for the capture of Harris in this case, and the 3 men were charged guilty of starting a riot. This was later overturned in another significant case, but it was a fairly good precedent for getting fugitive slaves across. And the last stop that I wanted to look at was that of Maudlin. I was not able to find another name for them, but they're around right here. This should be around the area that they were at. Maudlin was actually one of the few that I was able to find actual narrative accounts for, and he was the only one that I found multiple for, which is kind of interesting since he was one of the less well-known. People would say, oh, Coffin was the last stop, Murray was the last stop, but it appears to be that Maudlin was the last stop on the Underground Railroad in Indiana. Possibly the Indiana government site confused C.L. Murray with Maudlin, because this is about 3.5 miles from here to Michigan. But C.L. Murray is definitely not 4 miles, which they said was the distance here. So perhaps they confused his name with that of Murray. One of the narratives that I found detailed Maudlin stopping a slave owner from on his way to capture the family of David and Lucy Powell, which was who was being held or harbored nearby. And he took them to case, and Maudlin worked with an attorney to win the freedom of the family. And then in another narrative, he rescued a mixed woman from her half-white brother. He disguised her, and he ran from 4 pursuers. He was later confronted on the road, and he fooled them into thinking he was someone else or there for another purpose. Perhaps they didn't have a complete description of the man or didn't know him well. But he was able to escape, and he brought the family to the shore of the Detroit River, and she was carried safely to Canada. So that's the majority of my progress on my project so far. Like I said, I plan to document as many places in Indiana as possible for the full project, and will likely be presented with pictures and a text document rather than a video tour. But due to inaccuracies in the information I was able to gather and the amount of information I have currently, I felt that this was the best way to present my information. Thank you.